Welcome to another episode of OG55. Today I am flying solo, reacting to friend of the channel, Hey Bricky, all about a missing e-ticket attraction in Frontierland. We're going to watch the video. We're going to break it down up next on this West Coast edition of OG55.
I ain't got nothing to say but West Side.
Welcome aboard, everybody, to another episode of OG55. We are talking all today about Frontierland. We got a great Hey Bricky video. I want to thank Hey Bricky, by the way. Last night we had an amazing live stream. Bricky was in the chat. He's an amazing dude. We had a lot of fun with him last night on that live. But yeah, without further ado, let's break this video down. Here we go. Bricky is rocking the 55 hat. I absolutely love it. This video is titled The Missing Attraction in Frontierland, courtesy of the Hey Bricky YouTube channel. Smash that like button, subscribe to our friend Hey Bricky. Let's play the video and react along the way. Let's rock and roll. Take it away, Bricky.
Frontierland has ever felt small to you, like something was missing? That's because something is missing. A ride, a big one that was designed to tower over the land, literally. You've probably already ridden it 100 times, not in Frontierland, but just a few steps away. It's one of the most visible attractions in the entire resort, and at one time, it was planned to go right here. Bricky here. If you love discovering what could have been at Disneyland, hit subscribe, because today we're digging up the mountain that Disney buried. Frontierland may be home to the wildest ride in the wilderness, but beyond Big Thunder, what else is there in Frontierland? A shooting gallery, which don't get me wrong, I love. Got that Kentucky shot, some shops, but really I would describe Frontierland as a hallway dressed like a Disney space land.
Yeah.
And sure, you've got the rivers of America, but to me personally, this feels like its own land. And this is my argument. It hosts its own attractions, 4 of them. It has its own detached backstory, and it also has its own name. So to me, the Rivers of America is its own land, which then leaves Frontierland as the only Disneyland with only one attraction. And for years when Disneyland opened, Fantasyland didn't connect to Frontierland. One path led to fairy tales, and the other sent you straight to a river. I mean, of course, unless you turned left, and then that was going to take you over to Adventureland. But much like the Grand Canyon, it wasn't always this way. But Disney had big plans to change the entire north side of Frontierland, and those plans were way beyond where Big Thunder Mountain sits today. And at one point, a whole new land was on the table, and at the center of it, an attraction that could have been the missing piece that Frontierland still needs.
Yeah, and I want to pause right here because I've said many times, I've been part of this Disney like online community for a very long time. Like back in like the AOL dial-up days and all that good stuff with the Disneyland news groups, right? Long time ago. This particular attraction that Bricky is going to break down for us was literally like back then, 95 to 98 is when we started hearing about this stuff back then. And I absolutely loved this concept. And I was really disappointed when they ended up axing it. But let's go ahead and let Bricky take over and we'll kind of dive in from there.
So long before Disney California Adventure was even an idea, Disneyland was already trying to figure out a way to expand.
And I will say too, I love this rock work that Disney added when they expanded with Galaxy's Edge. This is absolutely gorgeous. It provides a lot of shade. Visually, it just looks really stunning. This was one of my favorite parts of the sort of Disneyland enhancement project. I think it was called Project Stardust, if I'm not mistaken, where they were kind of going in through Disneyland and trying to adjust and improve it to make way for Galaxy's Edge. And this is one of my favorite parts of that. I love the rock work and how they designed that. It's absolutely gorgeous.
And Frontierland. They'd already reimagined Fantasyland, and they'd already redone Tomorrowland twice. Still waiting for that third time. But Frontierland still stuck in the same old dusty boots, spurs not included. So Imagineering got to work, and what they dreamed up was Geyser Mountain,
Yes.
a towering ride that would transform the back half of Frontierland, where you would have entered through a rickety prospector's camp and wandered deep into the mountain, rigged with steam.
Geyser Mountain. Okay, this is a cool concept, right? And we're going to dive into it pretty deeply in a second here, but it tells you how old this is, though, right? Because Disney doesn't really do attractions like this anymore. You know, I mean, would they make an attraction like this today? Maybe, but it would probably be Woody themed, right? From Toy Story, or like some big Disney IP. You know, Disney doesn't really do the big thunders and the Geyser Mountains anymore, which is sad. I mean, as a Disney nerd, I want to see those IP-less attractions, right? But at the same time, I'm realistic enough to know the normies want the Woody ride. The normies want the Iron Man ride and the Elsa ride. I get that. But I do, as a Disney nerd, miss the days when Disney did create attractions that weren't necessarily tied to a franchise. It was pretty cool to see.
Pipes, bubbling mud pots, and something very unstable. And in the queue, you would pass through an old inventor's home, walls covered in geological maps, hand-scribbled notes, and one massive sketch of the mountain's center geyser, where you would notice mining claws had already torn open the rock. Something below was pushing back, and by the time you reached the barn, where you were face to face with an odd drilling machine that was about to launch you sky high.
Now, that concept art actually reminds me a lot of the Journey to the Center of the Earth attraction over at Tokyo Disney Sea, right? So that's kind of interesting, because this was in the mid 90s that they were kind of throwing this idea around. And I have no information on this, and maybe Bricky will get into it later on in the video, but I wonder if this ride vehicle and the design concepts for Geyser Mountain were sort of reused or reimagined and altered a little bit for that Disney Sea attraction eventually. And again, we'll see if he dives into that, but it does look pretty similar to that ride over there in Tokyo.
It was about to launch you sky high. I just had the world's greatest Disney janitor roll by. He parked the cart up so it would be quiet. What a hero. But here's where it gets strange. Some of Geyser Mountain's story just doesn't add up, at least not the way that it's been told, Disney fan to Disney fan. I think we're looking at a game of telephone here. Because if this was always supposed to be Disneyland's next big thrill ride, then why does this timeline overlap so cleanly with something else that was in the plans? And as we'll learn in today's adventure, why does this plan fall right apart when California Adventure is getting ready to open? What's up, my man?
What's up, man? Can I do a picture with you?
Let's do it. I just punched you in the stomach. My bad. Today we're going to do what we always do on this channel.
And real quick, we had the honor of actually hanging out with Bricky for the opening weekend of Disneyland's 70th. And Bricky is a really, really cool dude. A lot of people were coming up to him when we were walking through the parks and stuff. And he takes a lot of time with people, fans, subscribers who come up to him and talk to him. And I just love that. I absolutely love that. You know, he's a big channel, but he doesn't just say, hey, and keep going. He'll take time with you, you know? So I respect that a whole lot. Bricky's a good dude.
We're going to study Disneyland's past, but this time to figure out what Disney was trying to do in their future. And that future is in the 1990s. And then sadly, like all of these stories, where they all end up, why did they change their mind? Before Geyser Mountain was pitched as the next big thrill ride for Frontierland, Tony Baxter had already imagined it. Only back then, a ride that would eventually be themed to be a drop ride started out as a boat ride. And it wasn't called Geyser Mountain, started out being named Geyser Falls. The original plan was to place it at the entrance of a brand new land, Discovery Bay, a steampunk city of dreams where jewels...
See, even like this trolley that you see kind of crossing over this bridge and everything, very reminiscent of some of the stuff you see in Tokyo. I'm very interested if a lot of these concepts were taken over there to Tokyo for their Disney Sea park, because Disney Sea opened in 2001. So it would be around this time, like mid to late 90s, when they were kind of throwing around that Disney Sea concepts. And it's interesting to me that there's elements of these projects that I kind of see similarities with the Tokyo Disney Sea project.
Verne met the Old West. And Geyser Falls would have been the visual transition between two worlds and two different times.
Yeah.
At the edge of this fantastical shoreline sat an international shopping district called the Crossroads. It would have been about right here. The secondary Main Street USA would connect Fantasyland to Frontierland like Big Thunder Trail does today. Just behind it, an e-ticket attraction that would take guests into a dormant geyser just as it erupted back to life. The ride would have used mineshaft elevators and pulleys to send boats up and down inside the earth, with practical effects simulating boiling mud and seismic shaking. And this is where the lore of Jason Chandler begins. Jason will be a through line in today's video because he was the eccentric inventor rumored to have drilled Big Thunder Mountain in search of untold riches. And in the future, it would be his cabin that we would go through in the queue, where we would explore a different plan in a different decade with a different name. Then Geyser Mountains, but not as it is in this part of the story, Geyser Falls. I'm trying to make this as easy to follow as possible, but it is a complicated story. And according to Disney lore, his drilling machine cracked open something deep inside the mountain. And if this is starting to sound familiar, somewhere along the way, this plan changed because Discovery Bay, unfortunately, was shelved in 1984. Splash Mountain would be announced in 1987, and suddenly a thrilling water-based drop ride didn't seem quite so groundbreaking in the 90s. So the next time the idea surfaced, it came with a new ride system, a new name, but the same story was still underneath. And yet something still doesn't quite add up, because while Discovery Bay disappeared from Disneyland's map, part of its story never really left. And these parts didn't match Disney's future plans. My man, thank you.
My man, Ricky.
Have fun today, guys.
So much.
Love you.
Maybe.
Discovery Bay never happened, but the dream of expanding Disneyland past its western edge, that dream never went away. So back when I did the video about the popes, the only people to ever live inside of Disneyland, that was the moment when I realized at one point, the Pope House that's set back in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, where the Millennium Falcon sits today, that house was almost moved because Disney was thinking about putting Indiana Jones back there.
Wow.
Now, we all know he got tucked between the Jungle Cruise and Pirates of the Caribbean. But at one point in the 90s, they were imagining what they could already put back here. And of course, eventually, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge would show up. But long before that, there was a very different plan. And that plan included more Frontierland coming this way. And it seems that plan changed several different times. Because in the late 80s, early 1990s, Imagineers wanted to build an entire attraction on the other side of the berm, right where I'm standing today. And at one point, there's not a lot of information about this, only an article that was placed in the local newspapers, syndicated all around Southern California. And if you look at the map, it shows they wanted to put a Geyser Falls VR experience back here.
That's crazy.
This is the only evidence of that. But it does show that they were thinking about putting one attraction back here. And the VR attraction makes a lot of sense. Just like they had done with Indiana Jones, modest front show building leads people into a big black box. Therefore, they could have a guest.
And that really is amazing what they did with Indiana Jones, because when you enter through Adventureland, it's like this kind of this modest, like he was saying, this modest kind of entrance. You see, there's a temple, yeah, but nothing to what you think you're going to experience, right? Like the outside does not really match the attraction and how vast and big of scope Indiana Jones is. I think it was absolutely brilliant what the Imagineers did with Tony Baxter with that attraction, where the Adventureland entrance felt kind of small, kind of quaint, but once you go in there and you kind of meander through this temple and you get further and further into the temple, and it empties out into this amazing attraction, it's honestly a masterclass in themed entertainment. It's, to this day, in my opinion, one of the most impressive queues and just attraction ever built by both Disney or Universal. So an incredible feat for Imagineering with Indiana Jones Adventure, in my opinion.
Experience, expand Frontierland, but still keep the busiest backstage area of the park humming along, business as usual. This would have been actually a great solution. And to my records, this would have had the exact same storyline as Discovery Bay. Same idea of drilling deep into the mountain, but this time you wouldn't float through a boat. Because as this idea would evolve away from boat or possibly VR, you would ride inside a massive steam-powered drilling machine, descending into the earth, and suddenly a geyser explodes beneath you, launching your vehicle straight up. Imagineers created concept art, storyboards, engineering plans, and some even say there was a detailed model. At least Jim Hill says that he saw it. Surrounding it would be a whole industrial complex built around bubbling geysers and jagged red rock, also paying tribute to what sit back in Frontierland before all of this. I love how they keep the story going. This was going to be Disneyland's next major e-ticket since Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
But then, as always, these plans changed. As Disney was preparing for a brand new theme park across the Esplanade, they started to get nervous. Their legitimate fear, comical to us in today's timeline, was what if Disney California Adventure is too popular? What if the then Disneyland, turning 45 years old, suddenly looked too old compared to the new park? The solution they'd come up with is they would give Disneyland its own jaw-dropping thrill ride to keep the pace. And this is where I believe this story takes a major shift, where a lot of Disney fans possibly get the story wrong. I mean, I could be the wrong one, but the current story just doesn't make sense if you really study it. Because to my estimation, Geyser Mountain was reworked. No more slow descent, no more drilling through tunnels. Now your vehicle would launch suddenly upward. And I mean suddenly. Flung into the air as a geyser saves you from a collapsing bridge. Sounds pretty incredible, right? But, you know, as always, there's just one small problem. Because friends, look at this concept art. Where exactly is the huge vertical launch supposed to happen? Nothing in here looks more than 3 or 4 stories. And the way this launch is explained, it sounds like it would be more than 2 or 3 stories. Because if you're going across a bridge, when it happens, you're already a story up. So you don't have a lot of room to really take off, at least not the way that it's explained. And this is when I started to realize that maybe Disneyland was never working on the ride we were told, at least not a ride that looked like this at this moment in time. Because possibly in their moment of fear, they were looking to repackage an idea. Maybe it would be something completely different, but something that had already been proven to be a massive win on the East Coast.
Here we go.
When Disney California Adventure finally opened in 2001, Frontierland didn't get its new big attraction. But something else did show up that looked extremely familiar. Grizzly Peak, a towering mountain at the center of DCA, filled with roaring geysers, blasting steam, and of course, a water-based thrill ride that spins and soaks, and I've never rode it before, and I don't plan on doing it anytime soon. And the more you look at it, the more it starts to resemble the then plans and concept art that we have for Geyser Mountain. The layout, the rock work, even the 2009 concept artwork that's floating around everywhere online. It shows an industrial site with a wooden walk-up structure that looks almost exactly like Grizzly River Run's loading zone.
And that's the beauty of Disney, and both with the theme park space, but even with like animation and stuff like that, is that ideas never really die at Disney. Okay, Walt Disney was kicking around the idea of a Beauty and the Beast, a Little Mermaid, a Snow Queen, which turned out to be Frozen. He wanted to do a lot of these movies, and he never did them, right? Or they kicked the can and they sort of tinkered with it, but it never got off the ground. And then eventually we got it done, decades later. But even with this thing, right? You have that Grizzly Mountain concept, and it never got off the ground, no pun intended, right? But elements of it, themed elements and ideas and concepts were borrowed for a Grizzly. right? I do believe that early concept art that Bricky was showing with the drilling ride vehicles, it's not a coincidence. Those look very similar to the vehicles and like the whole concept of what we got at Disney Sea with Journey to the Center of the Earth. So, you know, nothing dies in Imagineering. It always comes back in some way, shape, or form. That's why I'm holding out hope that we get some version of Westcott at the Disneyland Resort. Yes, maybe we'll never get the version we were promised, you know, 20 some odd years ago, right? But maybe we'll get a new park, a third gate in the Toy Story lot that actually borrows from Westcott. And there's elements of Westcott that's repurposed, reutilized, reimagined into a new park. So this is very interesting stuff from Bricky, and it just goes to show you, ideas never die over there, and they will sometimes show up in other attractions in some way, shape, or form.
There's even the mill in there. So that begs the question, if Disney really wanted to win people back to Disneyland, wouldn't you need something very different, something bigger, something bolder, and way more thrilling than what you just opened? Because if the two rides were this similar, how would the new one ever compete? Right. And this is where I have to really ask people, in this piece of concept artwork, the one that fans always point as proof of Geyser Mountain was a launch ride. It's from 2009. You can see it in the corner. This is the version of the project that was happening a decade earlier. So I have to ask, have fans been connecting the wrong artwork to the right story? Because if this concept art really was for a thrill ride that launched guests high into the sky, then where is that moment in the illustration? Where's the launch shaft? Where's the height? And where is the scale? It looks to me like a track ride that was modified into a water ride. Friends, it looks like Grizzly River Run, an early version of it. Some things had to change, but it's pretty close. The more you look at the concept artwork, the more this area over in here, the industrial part, it looks incredibly similar. Then what were Imagineers really building at this time, and what did we lose in the process? You see, for years, fans have repeated the story of Geyser Mountain like it was a gospel, a wild mining adventure, a powerful geyser, a thrilling launch into the sky. But the deeper I looked, the more familiar all of this started to sound. Because during this timeline in our story, the ride description shifted to what sounded almost identical to Tower of Terror. And almost because instead of dropping, you were getting shot up. Because friends, I believe originally the Tower of Terror wasn't planned for DCA. It was planned to hypothetically save Disneyland.
Yes, and there was a bit, you know, like I said, I was around back then on the message boards and the forums. DCA was struggling in 2001, 2002. Like when this park opened, it was really having a hard time attracting guests. Tower of Terror was sort of like almost like a kind of a last minute fix, an attempt to sort of get more people into DCA. DCA, just like I said, when it opened, it was having a hard time. Bugs Land was introduced into DCA to help it with kids because it didn't have a lot of kids rides. Tower of Terror opened in 2004. Definitely trying to prop this park up because they thought it was going to be a big hit. And when February of 2001 rolled around, it definitely was not. So Tower of Terror Light, as I call it, was definitely shoehorned in here to save this park.
Disney believed DCA would be a smash hit. And what would happen? Disneyland would need something big to win guests back. So Imagineering, once again, started working on an attraction for Frontierland, a vertical thrill ride, a new story, a new home, but a very familiar ride system. But they kept the same name, Geyser Mountain. I believe this is where fans get a little bit confused. But we all know what happened. Back when DCA opened up in 2001, this plan quickly fell apart because we all know DCA 1.0 flopped.
Yep.
Instead of Disneyland losing guests to the new park, it was the other way around. Suddenly, DCA was the one that needed saving, not Disneyland. So the plan quickly had to change. And because it had to happen quickly, this is where I think Disney cut a couple of corners. Rather than giving Disneyland a one-of-a-kind Western-themed launch ride, they moved the whole project across the Esplanade because they wouldn't need to start over. They didn't need a new ride system. They just took the tried and true version from Florida, scaled it down, and gave it to DCA. And just like that, the dream of Geyser Mountain was gone. The story, the art, the queue, the dream of completing Frontierland, all quietly shelved. And what do we get instead? Was what has become one of DCA's most popular attractions ever. But a ride was technically never, ever supposed to even be here. Wild. So there was a moment, a very real moment, when the missing piece of Frontierland wasn't a myth. It was a Western version of Tower of Terror that would rapidly send you up before it then brought you back down. And it would have made so much sense to place it right back here. A massive thrill ride right at the park's edge, towering above Frontierland.
That's awesome.
Pulling guests back toward the back lot, it would have been a theme park icon, a skyline shaping attraction that changed how you could look at Disneyland and at the same time look into Disneyland. And most importantly, this version of that ride technology, it would have been unique, not a scaled down clone. This version would have been ours, and ours uniquely. The more that I dug into this, you just can't convince me this wasn't their plan right before DCA opened. Because friends, this theory didn't come from nowhere, but a different Frontierland in a different park in a different country. So if you needed proof that this theory was real, let's talk about Frontierland in Paris. Because over in Disneyland Paris, there was a plan almost identical to Geyser Mountain. It was given the exact same name, and the idea was exactly the same. Give their Frontierland one other major e-ticket attraction. But its fate is identical to the problem we saw here at Disneyland. This is the Disney concept artwork for Paris. However, this Disney concept artwork matches the idea that was being pitched in the late 90s when they were planning on trying to figure out how to win folks back over from California Adventure being wildly successful. And that is humorous. Just like in California.
And this is the thing. This is why I don't get super upset. Like, a lot of fans get really mad about, you know, how when a concept or an idea gets canceled, right? And it's shelved or whatever. Nothing ever really goes away like permanently at Disney. Like, these ideas are constantly reused in some form or fashion. So yeah, maybe this time it didn't work out, but believe me, they dust off those ideas a lot and they reuse them, repurpose them in other ideas, other attractions. So if something that you like that was announced and never made it to be, just keep your eyes out, keep your eyes open, because honestly, there might be an attraction in the future that utilizes the elements of that thing that you wanted, in a new attraction. So
Paris scrapped its Geyser Mountain plans and instead brought in a version of Tower of Terror to save its struggling second gate. Same problem, same solution.
And a major thanks to these fan models showing the building's placements, ride track layouts, how it would have worked in Paris, it would have also worked identically here at Disneyland. Because they point out something very real. A towering thrill ride meant to sit right alongside Big Thunder Mountain that would not only complete the land, but complete the land's story. And it is absolutely wild how perfectly this layout would have worked here in Anaheim.
Would have been awesome.
If the attraction were to be dropped between Big Thunder Mountain and the Rivers of America, kind of over where Cascade Peak once was, make sure you check out that video as well, right where the tunnel to Galaxy's Edge sits right now. And in some of this fan concept artwork, you even see a tunnel that looks just like ours, really giving you an idea of how well this would have worked in Anaheim and how different it would have made Disneyland if Disneyland felt like it needed a competitive advantage. This concept artwork, this scale, it matches that story. The placement makes sense, and it would have made the land's energy complete. Yet I kept finding everyone telling the same version of the story that I just couldn't get to match up. I didn't want to just tell the story blindly. And the more I dug into it, the more the artwork didn't match the narrative that's been told. Acting as if the two stories or ideas made by the same company couldn't possibly be the same concept, where an idea that didn't work at one park at one time wouldn't just come back off the shelf for a different park at a different time. I mean, after all, Disney is the king of recycling ideas, and no good idea ever fully goes away.
1000%.
And if you think about it, it makes so much sense, because this ride saved Hollywood Studios, Walt Disney Studios in Paris, a horrible theme park, and it also saved Disney California Adventure. It surely could have also saved Disneyland, but Disneyland didn't need saving. In a way, Tower of Terror, or Mission Breakout, is the ghost of Geyser Mountain. This is the bones of what Frontierland once almost became. And it technically is the missing attraction of Frontierland. And to me, that is absolutely wild, and why I love going on these wild goose chases. Really, the saddest part, this would have easily have worked.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Bricky, fantastic video, my friend. I love this. I absolutely love this. I remember hearing about Geyser Mountain years ago. It was crazy back in the AOL dial-up message boards and all that stuff. And it was cool to have you make a video on that concept, because it was something it's a concept that I've thought about. I think about periodically, like, man, that would have been really, really cool to have that. But c'est la vie, we'll never see it, unfortunately. But elements of it, like you were saying, have been worked into the Disneyland resort fabric. So again, I want to give a big shout out to Hey Bricky on this amazing video. Make sure you check him out. Make sure you subscribe to his amazing channel. Also, the Bricky vlog, which also does amazing content. I'll be linking both of those channels in the description down below. But I want to hear from all of you. What do you guys think about Geyser Mountain? Would you have wanted that in Frontierland? Would you have preferred it to Galaxy's Edge? I know a lot of you probably would have. A lot of fans aren't too happy with Galaxy's Edge. You know what I'm saying? So I would be very curious to hear those opinions. Would this have been something that you would have preferred over Galaxy's Edge? If not, I'd love to hear from you as well in regard to your opinions on that. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching this episode of OG55. And until the next time, see you later, alligator.
Thank you for watching OG55. If you aren't already, consider becoming a member today.